Images released by Washington which purport to show how Russia attacked eastern Ukraine has led to much more speculation in the media. The images were posted on Twitter by a Washington official. RT's Gayane Chichikan cuts through the spin.
Some journalists received the satellite pictures, which the U.S. presents as evidence of Russian shelling into Ukraine, via email. But much of the world found out about it from the Twitter account of the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. One of the images, according to U.S. officials, shows Russian self-propelled artillery in Russia, and the other part of that same image, U.S. intelligence determined, shows craters inside Ukraine indicating strikes from artillery. The date on the picture is July 23rd. These images have changed quite a few hands before they made their way into the ambassador's tweets. On all of these pictures, you see the name of the company, Digital Globe, which is a commercial provider of satellite imagery and aerial photos. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence is said to have analyzed the pictures and written all these captions with their analysis. Then they handed it to the State Department to be released via Twitter. The spokesperson of the Russian Defense Ministry had this to say.
Such materials weren't posted on Twitter coincidentally, since it's impossible to establish their authenticity due to lack of exact reference to the location and the extremely low resolution.
Journalists now operate in an environment where both sides, that is the U.S. and Russia, brush off evidence put forward by the other. U.S. officials attack media that dare to even question the information that they put forward. So RT came under yet another attack, this time on Twitter. Here's the U.S. Embassy in Russia responding to our news tweets about the satellite images. It says, considering who pays RT's bills, it's not surprising that RT questions validity of U.S. satellite evidence. And then there's another tweet saying, given some of the experts shown on RT, it's very hard to believe anything they say. One has to wonder if the underlying implication is that everybody absolutely must believe everything the U.S. government says and presents as evidence. Well, there's not much questioning in the U.S. mainstream media.
CNN has learned U.S. intelligence satellites and radars have monitored repeated artillery fire from the Russian side of the border for the last several days.
In Washington, I'm Gayane Chichikan, RT.
Ukraine's Prime Minister has resigned in what he says is part of an attempt to find a peaceful solution to the country's political deadlock. The parliament is now reviewing several other concessions made by Ukraine's president, but the opposition is pledging to continue mass protests in the capital until the country's head of state steps down. And RT's Alexei Yarashevsky is in Kiev for us right now. Alexei, what exactly is today's vote in parliament going to address?
It would not be an exaggeration to say that today is the most important parliamentary session in the history of modern Ukraine, and has already started with some big news, with the country's Prime Minister Nikolai Azarov saying he is offering his resignation as a step to stop the violence, to bring the country to peace. We do know that last night the sides of the political crisis have managed to agree to abolish the controversial anti-riot legislation, and also to release the prisoners, all those who were detained during the mass protests, even the so-called right-wing sector, the hardcore right-wing nationalists who are in the core of the protest. They've said also last night that they would withdraw from the governmental quarter, dismantle the barricades and retreat to the pre-January 19th position, which is the Independence Square, if a compromise between the opposition and the president is found. So all these laws, all these amendments will be voted within this parliamentary session. We're certainly following it. Also, we do understand that, even judging by this statement by the right-wing sector, that the opposition would not completely remove the protests. It would continue on the Independence Square until they get what they want, which is the resignation of the president. In the latest news, with the latest news that the government is stepping down, it will be interesting to see whether the opposition would actually be willing to take the job, because we do know that one of the leaders of the opposition has already refused to take Prime Minister's job when he was offered it by the president. In other news, we also do know that EU's Foreign Affairs Chief Catherine Ashton is coming over to Kiev tonight, even though she was meant to come at the end of the week, but we're still unclear. We have no information as to why she decided to come earlier to the Ukrainian capital. Certainly we're following all the developments on this very turbulent story.
Sure, Alexei Yarashevsky in Ukraine, thank you very much indeed. And let's now discuss the political developments in Ukraine with Ben Aris, editor and publisher of Business New Europe, who joins us now live from Moscow. Ben, thank you very much indeed for your time now. So Azarov has said that he resigns because he wants to calm down protesters, because he wants a peaceful resolution of the crisis. Do you think it will be enough?
I'm not sure it will be. Clearly the government are looking for options for ways of placating the opposition. I mean, the violence has been escalating and now it's spread into the regions. The whole country is in uprising. And so Yanukovych and his government are in an increasingly difficult position and they're trying to actually cool tempers. But the opposition has said time and time again that they will stop short of nothing except new elections. And Yatsenyuk, one of the Troika leaders, has already refused the job of Prime Minister, so the question of who's going to take over remains open. I'm pretty sure none of the opposition leaders will step into that role if they were offered the job.
Sure, the protests in Kiev have been ongoing for more than 2 months now, with the opposition actually demand for the Prime Minister to resign. Why do you think it took him so much time to do so?
Well, following the events of the weekend, I mean, you have to bear in mind, up until now, it's been a clash between principles. On the one side, the opposition is saying we have the right to protest, and on the other side, the government is saying we are the elected government and therefore we have the right to lead the country. But things went to a new level at the weekend where the opposition supporters started taking over the regional governments. I mean, it is outside now the law and outside the constitution. In effect, you have a straight power clash or a coup d'etat in so much as, unelected people are taking over regional governments. And so Yanukovych is finding himself increasingly put up against the wall in the sense that in order to resolve this, one of the options is to put the army in. And nobody wants that. Indeed, the army took themselves out of the equation by declaring their neutrality yesterday, which is good news because it means the bloodiest solution to this won't happen. But his options are being reduced, and I think this is an offer on his part to find some sort of compromise to actually end the conflict on the street.
Yeah, and also some experts are already suggesting that without Premier Azarov in the government, President Yanukovych is now essentially a lame duck. Would you agree with that?
Well, the problem is, I mean, the government can work for another 2 months without a prime minister, and under the new constitution that was introduced in 2004, most of the power remains with the president. But certainly the government looks less legitimate without a proper prime minister at the top, and Yanukovych is then sort of clearly in charge of everything. And for the opposition, that's going to be even less acceptable, I mean, less legitimate government. But it does mean that his authority has been reduced and just throws the whole politics of the situation into chaos.
The Prime Minister's resignation was not the only demand from the opposition. We know that a snap presidential election is also on the list. Should we expect concessions from the president on that too?
I think that's the last thing that he's going to agree to. He's going to try everything else before he actually agrees to elections. But, the country remains split. You have to remember the last polls said that, roughly 50% of the country supports Yanukovych and about 50% support the opposition and 42% support Yanukovych. And his ratings have actually gone up a little bit recently. The question is if it went to a second round, he'd probably lose to the opposition. And therefore, I think Yanukovych is going to try and avoid having elections until they're scheduled, which is February 2015, if he can get away with it.
Ben Aris, editor and publisher of Business New Europe, live from Moscow. Thank you very much indeed for that. We appreciate it.
Vladimir Putin appears to be doubling down on Ukraine, stepping up Russia's role in the fight between Ukraine's government and rebels there. Tonight, the U.S. and Ukraine are accusing Russia of firing artillery on Ukrainian troops from Russian soil and preparing to move more heavy weapons over the border. It is a dangerous escalation in the most serious tensions between Russia and the West since the Cold War. David Martin begins our coverage.
Not every video can be verified, but U.S. officials say that half a dozen times over the past 2 weeks, Russia has fired barrages from its own territory into Ukraine. The shelling, which Russian soldiers have been bragging about on the internet, lasts about a half hour and appears to be aimed at Ukrainian military units fighting the separatist rebels. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Martin Dempsey said Vladimir Putin is showing no signs of being cowed by the international condemnation of Russia's alleged role in the shoot-down of the Malaysian airliner.
There may be some folks who could convince themselves that Putin would be looking for a reason to de-escalate. He's actually taken a decision to escalate.
The shelling began at the same time Russia increased the flow of weapons to the rebels in Ukraine, including tanks, artillery, multiple rocket launchers, and apparently the surface-to-air missile which shot down the airliner. The weapons are identical to those in the arsenals of the Ukrainian military, allowing the rebels to claim they captured them on the battlefield. They are coming from this base in southern Russia, where a much larger caliber rocket launcher has been spotted in recent days. A comparison of satellite photos from June and July show how much the supply base has expanded in the past month.
Both the shelling and the arms shipments appear to be driven by the fact that the rebels have suffered a series of setbacks at the hands of the Ukrainian military.
David Martin at the Pentagon for us tonight. Thank you, David.
And it appears to show the attack coming from a Russian border town that is just on the other side. The shelling allegedly targeting Ukraine's military. So this is a new development.
This is a new development. On multiple occasions during this 4-month rebellion in Ukraine, Ukrainian government has made the charge that the Russian military has been firing on Ukrainian forces from within the territory of Russia. Now, something different. For the first time, it's U.S. officials who are making that charge.
We have new evidence that the Russians intend to deliver heavier and more powerful multiple rocket launchers to the separatist forces in Ukraine, and have evidence that Russia is firing artillery from within Russia to attack Ukrainian military positions.
Well, now to another major trouble spot in Ukraine and the new claims that Russia is planning to escalate the conflict there. The U.S. and Ukraine say Russia is now bombarding Ukrainian forces from Russian soil and that they are preparing to shift more heavy weapons, including tanks, across the border. Let's get more now from Mark Albert in our Washington bureau. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. In addition to the new weapons, a key U.S. ambassador says Russia is staging more troops on the Ukrainian border after pulling thousands back just 2 months ago. At a security forum in Colorado Friday, U.S. Ambassador to NATO Douglas Lute revealed an apparent Russian buildup.
Now up again over about 15,000 Russian troops amassed along the border with Ukraine.
Less overt, Lute said, are the large amounts of training, funding, and support Russia has given the rebels.
This is civil war by proxy, if you will, and its instability generated largely by Moscow and by Putin.
And it may be about to intensify. The Pentagon said Friday it believes the transfer of heavy caliber artillery systems from Russia to Ukrainian rebels is imminent. A powerful rocket system is suspected of bringing down MH17. The U.S. also says Russian forces are now firing at Ukraine's military from inside Russia, which underlined White House calls for new punishment. Press Secretary Josh Earnest.
It's certainly the position of the United States, Peter, that additional costs should be imposed on Russia and Putin for their actions in Ukraine.
The State Department thinks sanctions are already having an effect on Russia's economy.
President Putin has a choice here. He can increasingly become isolated from the international economic system if he wants to continue this escalation, or he can do the opposite.
In a direct response, Russia's foreign ministry called out the State Department spokeswoman by name, saying she, quote, chopped a big basket of anti-Russian cliches as part of a U.S. smear campaign against Russia. The ministry also said Washington, quote, shares the responsibility for the bloodshed in full.
А ты думаешь, сейчас, если что-нибудь еще раз такое полетит, ты бабахнет прямо здесь? Сейчас дома сидеть, сегодня, завтра тем более. 2 дня лучше посидеть, ничего с вами не станет. Да, там движение.
Какой самолет, может, это даже и вертушка? Нет, какой вертолет? Вертолет?
Ну там он далеко уже все закончило гореть, а здесь все, здесь поле разгорелось.
Вертолет без а что он там не один? Ага, представляешь, вот это вся зона была бы в дыму, да, такая... Я бы представил, и микрона подбили. Не смей, сколько бы ты было на воздухе, да?